Today, I'm with the first pick. Summer scouting continues with an early look at wide receivers in the 2020 NFL draft class. I'm Ryan Wilson. I'm going to be joined shortly by Ran Carthon. His picture froze seconds before we went live. Former Titans GM. This is episode 275. Maybe Ran didn't want to hear this part, but Ran, there are 289 days to the 2026 NFL draft. I know you get a little fired up when I tell you how many days until it's go time, but 289. And by the way, in case you missed it, and Rand, I like your little golf attire there. You just got off the links where you told me you shot a 78. That's pretty good. In case you missed it, Rand, last week we covered our 10 favorite quarterbacks. I don't know why you would miss it. You were there with me, but you can check that out in the old podcast feed. And today, talking wide receivers. And in case you're keeping notes at home, Thursday, talking about God's position, Rand, the running back. So be sure to check that out as well. All right, before we get going here, how you doing, Mr. Carthon? You had a vacation with your family. Did you guys enjoy the 4th?
Well, first of all, it's good to be back with the fellas. Good to see you, Ryan. Good to hear you, Sharon. But spent the 4th in Vegas covering Athletes First Elite Week with our own Brian McFadden with BMAC. So that was fun to be around some players. So that was a cool thing. And then, like you said, literally flew back in on Saturday night and was gone Sunday with the family. Went up to Coalmont, Tennessee, and hung out on some cliffs and some mountains and some hikes. So it was good. And now I'm back home, and hopefully I could be home for a little while.
And producer Sharon, he's not kidding. He was hanging literally off a ledge. He sent me a photograph like he was, I don't know who, Johnny Appleseed, I guess. You were up there living life to the fullest. I was worried for you, but I'm glad you made it back. I'm excited to talk about some of these wide receivers. And before we look ahead real quick, I want to look back. This isn't in the rundown, Sharon, but here's our top 5. If you're listening, if you're watching the graphic of our individual top 5, Ryan Wilson and Ran Carthon, of course. Then we're going to talk the consensus with the first pick, top 5, as we get through this process here. A lot of the same names and some names that are a little different as you get down the list, and that's okay. That's what makes this fun. But before we look ahead, Ran, I thought it'd be interesting to look back 12 months ago and what we talked about in summer scouting before you were with us. So it was me and our buddy Rick Spielman and Mike Renner. Wide receiver 1, 12 months ago, Luther Burden. And we had a top 10 range for him. He ended up going in the second round. He was wide receiver 5, which is sort of crazy. Number 2 on the list, also top 10 pick, predicted-wise, Tedrow McMillan. He went 8th overall. Emeka Ibuka also made that list. First, second round range. He was wide receiver 3 in this class, went 19th, I believe, at Tampa Bay. Evan Stewart was on this list. He returned to Oregon, and he just got hurt. He hurt his knee about a month ago, and his season's now in doubt, and that's bad news, obviously, for him. And then finally, to round out the list, it was Isaiah Bond, transferred from Alabama to Texas. On the field, he's a really good football player, probably going to be a day 2 guy, had some off-field concerns. He was undrafted, and he has yet to sign with the team as we are recording this. So just something to keep in mind as we get through this. One other thing I wanted to mention, too, quickly, and I'm going to get your thoughts on this. I went back and looked, going back to 2020, just the best wide receivers from those individual draft classes. Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 5. 2021 class, Jamar Chase, he was, in fact, wide receiver 1. 2023 class, when those wide receivers didn't go off the board till the 20s, Zay Flowers has probably been the most productive. It's probably close. He was wide receiver 3. And then last year, Brian Thomas Jr. and Ladd McConkey, wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 9. So my question to you before we get going here, Ran, and talk about our number 5 on our list, how hard is it to figure out who these wide receivers are going to be when they get to the next level? Because Brian Thomas Jr. was supposed to be a project, all athleticism and no refinement. He proved us wrong in year 1. And how much does scheme, quarterback, coaching, all that matter when you're trying to develop a wide receiver quickly?
Yeah, that ultimately is what's going to make the decision happen. Like, these guys' physical ability is what it is. They've always been talented. Most of the guys that we're talking about are 4- or 5-star recruits, big-time guys that most of them played early as freshmen. But it's about, at the next level, it's about being able to find the right scheme fit for your ability and having the quarterback, because the trigger man is the key. You got to have somebody to get you the ball. And some of these guys that we're talking about and some of these guys that we're not even going to talk about are, it's going to be a lot of questioning. And some of these guys have made transitions to new teams and new quarterbacks, and it's going to be interesting to watch as we work through this list. And you can see, where you can tell I sent my rankings in pretty late because I just kept digging, trying to unearth like a clear-cut number 1 for me. And to me, honestly, I think right now In my opinion, you have your top three, and then there are a bunch of guys, depending on your preference, that you could put in at 4, 5, 5A, 5B, 5C, however you see it.
Yeah, and that's what makes this exciting because there's no Arch Manning that we're going to talk about in terms of the wide receivers, and you can go any number of directions. And the other thing, just upon first glance, as we get through summer scouting here, it feels like this class, the wide receiver class for 26, is deeper than the 2025 class, at least up top. Do you think that's fair?
Maybe deeper in numbers per se. I'm just not sold right now on the talent level of this class being
Oh,
an elite class. I don't really feel like there's a Ted McMillan, in this class per se. So that's why I keep digging. I keep digging, and before we came on, I was watching a couple more guys. 'Cause I'm digging, trying to find out where that guy's going to come in and solidify himself as wide receiver one.
all right. Let's start at number 5 and work our way to number 1 here. And Denzel Boston out of UW, out of Washington, 6'4", 209. He's number 3 on my list. He did not make your top 6. If I'm wrong, correct me. But we can talk about why in a second. 6'4", 209. I had him as a early second round pick as we sit here. Wide receiver 3 on my board, as I mentioned. And my comp for him, and we'll do comps, and some will be good, and a lot may be bad, but that's okay. Jaden Higgins, Iowa State second round pick of the Houston Texans just a month or so ago. So he played primarily outside. Does have some punt return ability, which I thought was interesting. 104 targets as a big target, only 3 drops, huge catch radius, soft hands. I thought he had some surprising yards after the catch wiggle. The issue, of course, and this is sort of the issue I had with Jaden Higgins, I didn't think he was consistently getting separation early in the route, but he's an efficient route runner. I thought he uses his hands well. He's going to be good against press because of that size, and he actually is, in fact, good against press. And most of his catches on the short and intermediate routes will be contested catches, but he also had some surprising deep speed as a long strider for me. So he was my wide receiver 3, consensus number 5 for our list here. What'd you think about Denzel?
Like you said, he was a little further down for me. He was number 9 on my list. And I think the qualities that stand out about him are his size, his catch radius, and his hands. But beyond that, I didn't see a guy that was going to separate, and I thought he struggled to separate at the college level. I thought he had average lateral separation quickness. And again, it's him being able to frame the ball, to post up and create that separation using his size and his length, which I think here at the next level, at the NFL level, is going to be an issue once guys know that you can't necessarily run by them. So they're going to press you more and play you more, underneath without worrying about you being a vertical presence for him. So he was a little bit further down, and that's not to say that this guy can't play, because I think he can play. I do think he will be a day 2 pick. But I think there are a lot of guys like him, his stature, his build, his lack of separation, if you will, in this class. And so I'm trying to find that guy that can do it all.
So he reminds me a little bit. Jaden Higgins was my comp for him, and you can tell me how much you hate that if you want to. I thought Jaden at times struggled last year to consistently separate. Obviously, the Texans disagreed with me in terms of how high they took him. Our buddy Lee J. Doosable loved him as well. But also another name that comes to mind is Nico Collins coming out of Michigan. And Nico got substantially better once he got to the league. Obviously, C.J. Stroud helped with that, but a lot of that was Nico, and he got himself paid as a result. Any similarities between those two players and Denzel, or am I off base on that?
No, it's funny you bring up 2 Texans wide receivers there,
Yeah.
but I think it's probably more closer to Jaden Higgins than Nico. But because I did think Nico coming out, there was a question of how fast was Nico really. But like you said, a lot of these guys are long strider, high knee runners that cover ground. It may not be the quick, twitchy, explosive variety, but these are the type of guys that can close the distance just with their stride length and be able to put the DB in a conundrum and trying to figure out when to gets on them quickly, and it looks different. So it's almost like that lull you to sleep, type of speed. But I'm just interested to see what Denzel runs and see what the GPS times are. And that was one of those things that I looked at, and I made that note in my last line, is like, I'm going to reserve, the right to judge his speed until I can see him live and see him in person.
Right. And the other thing that often happens is you watch someone over the summer from the previous year's tape, and they've matured, they've gotten stronger, they've gotten faster, whatever. I remember Rome Odunze, I liked him over the summer, and then he went crazy in that last year. at UW with Michael Penix Jr. and that crew that went to the national title game. All right, one down. When we come back, depending on who you ask, Rand, this is wide receiver you, but we're going to go to Columbus, Ohio State, talk about their latest wide receiver who has a chance to be a first-round pick, and we'll do that right after this break. All right, producer Sharon, I'm going to say this off the top. You see Rand chuckling there because he had the nerve to say, and I want you to file this with HR if y'all watching. He said, I'm Mr. AARP because I'm older than him. Now, in your defense, Rand, I made a crack that grown folks don't play video games because you were bragging about some video game you got. But I'm keeping receipts until I lose my memory. I'll be sure to turn it in. So you better hope I lose my memory before we get to that point. All right, let's get back to this. Let's get back to these young folks. They don't care what these old timers are talking about. Number 4 on our list, Carnell Tate, and I will put a dollar in the with the first pick jar every time I call him Carnell Lake because I know I'm going to do it 1,000 times. But Carnell Tate out of Ohio State, number 4 on our list. You had him 3, and I had him as my wide receiver 9. I'm going to let you take over here because I want you to talk about Carnell because you like him a little bit more than I do. 6'3", 191. What'd you like about him to have him all the way number 3 on your individual list?
I mean, first of all, I like the size. He's 6'3" and some change, and he's a fluid, smooth mover. So watching him move, you wouldn't guess that he's 6'3" just with the movement ability. He's got quickness, he's got burst, and he's got twitch off the ball. He's smooth, he's fluid. Now, there are little things that he's going to have to refine. I think he tips his routes, getting in and out of breaks. I think he allows his pad level to rise. And in the run game, he looks unsure at time when the picture changes, when guys insert late, he kind of fills in, but he's not unsure. So he needs a clean picture. But I think the one thing that stood out the most to me, and you look at his production, 52 catches, 733 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now, it's known that he was the 3rd receiver on this team, but when you look at the totality of that offense, he was the 5th option behind the 2 backs as well. And so for him to have that type of production as a 5th option / number 3 receiver, I think the ceiling is definitely pointing up for him there at Ohio State. And now he's going to be the number 2 opposite of JJ Smith. And when you can imagine the type of coverage that's going to be rolled over there this year, he's going to see a lot of one-on-one matchups. He gave me the feel of a day 2 T. Higgins type pick, where he's just gonna show up and he's gonna make plays, and you're gonna look and say, wow, this guy put up some numbers. Because going into it, I would have never guessed this guy would have had 733 yards as the 3rd option on that team.
69 targets, only 3 drops as well. Incredibly consistent. T. Higgins is a good comparison because, and I'm guilty of this, and I bring it up often when we talk about T. Higgins. I fell for the fact that he didn't run particularly well at the combine or the pro day, wherever it was. And he played much faster than that. He should have been a first-round pick. And, as I like to say, sometimes we overthink it. But you mentioned the wide receiver view version of Ohio State and all those dudes that have come through there in the last 3, 4, 5 years and been first-round picks. Let me ask you this. How much of Carnell's success is a function of playing alongside Emeka and, of course, Jeremiah Smith, who you just mentioned, because he feels like a number 2 at the next level right now until he can prove otherwise, and that's not a bad thing to be. But any concern during the evaluation process, if you're going to take this guy top 50 and you're not quite certain what he's going to look like if he's the best wide receiver in the room at the next level?
No, I don't have any concern with it because, like you said, I value him the same way. I think he's potentially a number 3 early for a team, depending on where you take him, that he could be a number 2. I really believe that, and I see him that way. And sometimes in this league, and we know right now, this league plays a lot of 11 personnel. And so you need a legitimate 3 guys, right? And so you look at, and I'm gonna always lean on my 49er experience because that was the one place where I saw it done up close and personal. You look at where Deebo Samuel was taken in the 2nd round, depending on whether you saw him as wide receiver 1 there, and Brandon Ayuk was a 1st-round pick. So no matter which one you see as wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, both of those guys were taken in the top 2 rounds. And so to me, that shows that if you want a receiver, a number 1, a number 2, or even number 3 for that matter, you have to get them where you can get them and take them there. And so I don't have a problem with taking him in the top 50. You look at what Tampa Bay just did. You have Mike Evans, and you still go and take Emeka Egbuka at 19. for a guy that may start off the year as your number 3, which will eventually transition into your number 2, possibly your number 1. So you just got to take him where you can get him.
So last season, at least, Carnell played about 90% of the time outside, 10% of the time in the slot, or they moved him around. When you're talking about a number 2 or number 3, do you care about that he's played primarily outside? Of course, during the pre-draft process and during this fall, you're going to be at practice and you're going to see where he plays. You're going to talk to coaches about whether he can move around or not. But just in terms of the strict evaluation, if he's not familiar with playing the slot consistently, does that inform your decision about how you're going to evaluate him and how high or how low you might end up taking him?
No, because some of these guys are just an outside receiver or just an inside receiver. The same argument was made the other way when Justin Jefferson was coming out. He primarily played in the slot, and there were a lot of people that didn't think he could play outside. And then now we all have egg on our face for those that believe that. So some of these guys are just playing the roles that they're asked to play, and when their role changes, we'll see how they play him this year. Maybe they move him around a little bit more, play him inside, outside, because there is going to be a slot position open in that Ohio State offense this year.
Yeah, you talk about egg on your face. I actually asked Justin Jefferson that during his NFL Combine experience about can you play somewhere else, and he very politely, he couldn't have been nicer, but it felt like he probably had answered that question before, or maybe he was just trying to point out to me for not doing my homework. He said, if you go watch the year before, I actually played a little bit outside, so I can do it. And again, wide receiver 5. You talked about Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver 6. So you don't have to be wide receiver 1 to have success. And you could argue that Marvin Harrison was wide receiver 1 his year a few years ago. Emeka Egbuka might have a better rookie season. And Marvin's wasn't bad, but the Kyler Murray experience was up and down. He was coming back from that injury. Baker Mayfield feels a little bit more consistent. We'll see how that offense looks, whether it sort of follows up on what Liam Cohen did last year. But you talked about it at the top. Quarterback matters a lot, whoever the wide receiver is. And I think that sometimes can be more important than whether you get the Marvin Harrison Jr. at the top or whether you get the Ladd McConkey 50 picks later or whatever the case may be. What are your thoughts about that in terms of we're going to keep the Ohio State conversation going. What Emeka's rookie season might look like, because he is as complete a receiver as there is coming into this rookie season.
I do, and we talk about fit, and I think he is the perfect fit for that offense, and especially not knowing where Chris Godwin is on his recovery. And Chris Godwin, low key, is the key to that passing game in Tampa. And Mike Evans is who he is, the most consistent guy we've seen in years. But Chris Godwin and everything they ask him to do, play outside, play inside, insert, big in the run game in terms of his blocking. Emeka can fill that role immediately with how he plays, and I expect big things out of him this year.
All right. We've talked about our big guys here with number 4, number 5 on our list, 6'3" or taller. When we come back, we're going to talk about, give some love to the little guys, the Ryan Wilsons of the world, sub 5'10". And we'll start with an explosive playmaker from LSU, and we'll do that right after this break. All right, Ran. Got you giggling, got producer Sharon giggling. 2 adolescents and a grown folks' bodies. Look at you. You catch your breath there? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, man.
You good? Okay, good. All right, let's get to number 3 here. And this young man did not make your top 6. He was number 2 on my list, and I absolutely love Aaron Anderson out of LSU. Now, the issues physically, he's only 5'8", 187 unofficially. But as I mentioned, he's my wide receiver 2, and I'm going to oversell it here because it's summertime, and I'm aiming for the moon. I got some Tyreek and Waddle vibes when I watched him play. Now, he's not Tyreek. He's not Jalen Waddle right now, but there are glimpses of it. Now, he struggled with focus drops. His teammate, Nick Anderson, is also, I'm extremely high on him as well. He transferred in, didn't play last season except for one game because of a thigh injury. But 2023, he set the Oklahoma freshman record for 10 receiving touchdowns. So he's going to be another addition for Mr. Nussmeier at quarterback. But in terms of Aaron Anderson, he offers kick return ability, plays primarily in the slot. No surprise there. Transfer from Alabama after the 2022 season. But, you know, we talked about Nussmeier already, and we talked about him a lot, Ran. But you always see number 1 pop up because he's making plays all over the field. I would like him to be a little bit more refined as a route runner. He did have some focus drops at times and some turnovers untimely, but I thought the electric stuff that he did was high level electric. And at times he could be a game changer. And he can take a 5 yard hitch and turn it into a 50-yard touchdown. He can take slants. He can take quick game and make them into big gains. So I'm a big Aaron Anderson fan with the understanding that at 5'8", it's hard to be a first-round pick unless you are insanely special. Jalen Waddle was 5'10", maybe a little hair underneath that first-round pick. Obviously, Tyreek slipped to day 3 because of the off-field stuff. Where are you on Mr. Anderson?
I'm definitely a fan. And like you said, watching Nussmeier, whether it was last year or this year, watching the tape, he's the guy that kept flashing, right? And then having gone into LSU last year and seeing him in practice, watching him move, like the movement skills are real. He's an athletic guy. He's explosive. He's fast, and he catches your eye immediately when you see him move around on the field. And for me, I'm looking at my list. My top 5, I had 5A, 5B with Deion Burks and Eugene Wilson III, and then he was right there. And
Okay.
the only reason I have him right there below those guys, and both of those guys are coming off injuries, which could easily flip and put, Aaron at number 5. But the one thing about him, and you said it, his height, it's 5'8" is what we're listing him in, right? And so until I'd like to see a true measurable, a verified height on him, because if we're talking even 5'0", 8'0" or below, there are not very many elite high level wide receivers in our league at that height. And then the one thing, again, the ability, you see it quick, they play him in the slot. And I think they play him in the slot because of the size and just because they have bigger targets, on the outside. But in that offense, you don't see him run a lot of option and choice routes. A lot of the routes that they use him on are vertical coverage stretching type routes with clears it underneath for the other guys. And so the one thing that stood out about me, which is why I think one of the reasons they go and get a Nick Anderson, a bigger target for Nussmeier. Nussmeier may be 6'1.5", and so that's a tough target for him down the field throwing to a 5'8" receiver. And so you see sometimes where he's got the DB stacked and has a step on him, but because the DB is 6 feet, Nussmeier can't really see it. And so his best ball may come, at this next level when he has the taller type, quarterbacks that can see over the defense and get him the ball. But you talk about explosiveness, and I could see where you say the Tyreek, and I kept seeing those Tyreek type movements, but Tyreek's explosiveness, his downfield speed is just rare. And to me, at 5'8" or below, you have to have a rare quality. And I just don't see that in Aaron Anderson, but I'd love to have him on my team at some point.
Now, I know you and producer Sharon are track snobs, and in high school, Aaron ran a 10.7700. Is that okay with you? Because that feels like moving to me.
It's fair for high school, and so we won't confuse him running a 10.7 of saying he's a track guy. But I do think he's going to run 4.3. I think he will
Okay.
run in the range. And while we're talking about him, I just want to give a shout out to his high school, Edna Carr High School, which is a powerhouse in that New Orleans area. One of my really good friends, Sally Clavel, who scouts for the Minnesota Vikings. She was a big time hooper at Edna Carr
Mm.
and played college ball at Sam Houston State. So shout out to Edna Carr.
Sharon informs me that 10.77 is, in his words, slow. So y'all keep doing what y'all doing, and I'll be singing Aaron Anderson's praises while y'all say he's slow. Let me ask you this seriously though. So did you have Jalen Waddle as a first round pick? They're different players, but I'm just thinking size wise, because Jalen's pretty small for a first round pick, top 15 talent. And I'm trying to equate because Tank Dell was smaller, went in the 3rd round. Calvin Austin, the 3rd, was even smaller. He went in the 4th round, I believe. They're good players. Different levels have struggled with injury as well, which is also a concern. So where were you on Waddle? Because I'm trying to wrap my brain around the idea of how high realistically can Aaron Anderson go?
Yeah, I had Jalen Waddle as a first round pick. And
Okay.
again, we talked about it, and I think he is 5'10", and some change. But again, we talked about having that rare trait. that blue trait, and he had that with his speed, and it showed up every week, no matter if he was the 1, 2, 3 receiver on that team, or if it was punt return or kick return. You saw that trait that he had show up on a week-to-week basis, and you knew in that Alabama offense, if he had a small crease and he caught the ball on the move, it was night-night. It was game over. And so he had that, which I don't think Aaron Anderson necessarily has, but I think he's plenty fast. Like I said, he's going to run a 4.3. And just think about where we've evolved in terms of speed. Like, Ryan, when we were coming up, if you ran 4.4, you were legit. Mm-hmm. And now 4.4 is considered, so it's like everybody's 4.3, and I do think this guy's going to be one of the many guys that runs 4.3.
It's funny you say that, because
honestly, it's a mom and dad issue. He's 5'8". It's not his fault.
Yeah. Yep. And it's funny you say the 4.4 thing, because when Jordyn Addison ran a 4.47 a few years ago, people were like, to your point. Like, they were like, okay, I thought he was going to be a little faster. He plays faster than that. He was 5'11", I think, 175. So height-wise, fine. Weight-wise, maybe a little concern. He's a really good football player. In fact, he was lights out when JJ was hurt with that hamstring injury, I believe, a few years ago. So it's not the end of the conversation. It's sort of the start of the conversation when you talk about these physical tools, because to your point, there's only so much you can overcome based on what your parents gave you when you were born. Is he? Let me give you a fair number here. So 45. Would you think he has an opportunity to be drafted higher than 45, or is the situation where, like Tank Dell, like Calvin Austin III, like all these other guys, Darius Davis comes to mind as an undersized playmaker? Where, I guess the question is, what would Aaron Anderson have to do to inch his way into that top 45 conversation?
I think to get into that top 45 conversation, he's going to have to go for 1,200 yards or more and become a downfield threat, right? And again, some of this isn't his fault. He plays primarily in the slot. I think in the Baylor game, you saw him play a little bit more outside. If you go back and you watch that game, but even him playing outside in the Baylor game, they were just getting him the ball quick on a lot of quick screens, with people moving in front of him. And when I say it's not his fault, I was not talking about necessarily the mom and dad from the height issue, but him playing in the slot in Brian Kelly's offense, he's just not asked to run those whip routes, the option routes, the choice routes, where you can see him against a nickel win one-on-one laterally, separate laterally. Again, a lot of what you see him do is those coverage stretching, where he's got the safety over the top, he's got the corner underneath, and then he's clearing it out for those bigger receivers underneath at LSU last year.
Yeah, so we talked about Jaden Higgins being a second-round pick in part because of his size. His teammate, Jalen Noel, undersized, went third or fourth round, I believe. So he went a round or two afterwards. So we'll see what happens with Aaron Anderson, but they're going to be in a high-powered offense, and there will be very little in the way of excuses as to why no one on that offense doesn't put up some huge numbers, starting with Garrett Nussmeier. But let's take another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about your favorite wide receiver, at least as we sit here in early July, and we'll do that right after this break. All right, Ran. Jordyn, Tyson, Arizona State. Shout out to Pete Prisco. He was wide receiver 5 on my summer scouting list, but he is wide receiver 1 on your list. 6'1", 195. Had a mid-second round grade on him as we sit here in my comp, and you can do with it what you will. I saw a little bit of Alec Ayuminor, who was drafted by the Titans. Had some first-round buzz a year ago. I thought he struggled to separate, but he was a huge catch machine for Stanford. Physical at the top of his route, always got open. And fun little fact here, I'm not an NBA guy, but Jordyn's brother's Jalen Tyson, 20th pick in the 2024 NBA draft, which is news to me. But I'll let you take the floor here because Jordyn is your guy as we sit here in the middle of July.
No, he was a fun watch. I think he's a complete receiver. I see him more as a Z receiver with some big F, which is a big slot position flex, because I do think he can play in there. I think the name of this guy's game is strength. Like, I know he's listed at 195, but he looks and feels bigger than that on tape and just the way he plays. I think he does a really good job of knowing how to set up his routes and does a good job of leaning, sticking, and nodding at the top of the route, which gets the DB off balance, which allows him to create separation. And then I think his hands are, I think he just has really strong hands. He has really good body control. He has ball skills. I think he sinks well at the top of route. And one thing that stood out to me, going through all of these receivers on this list that we've talked about, is this guy can play through contact, which is you don't really see very many guys that can play through contact. And I was questioning his top end speed at once, but then the more you see him with the ball in his hands, I think that's when you see his true speed. And this guy is physical with the ball in his hands. He's a tough tackle. So he was by far my favorite guy. I'm not going to say by far, but he was my favorite guy I watched. And I thought when you mix in skill set and you match the production with it, I thought you saw the complete picture. So that's why he was my wide receiver one.
No, I love it, and there's a lot to like about him. He did not play at the end of the season when they lost in the playoff game, so that also hurt them a little bit. We talked a little bit about Sam Levitt, the quarterback. We'll talk a lot more about him as we get through the draft process. Cam Scadaboo had to take over that game after he threw up in the bucket there, but they still came up short. You talked about the position possibilities at the next level for Jordyn. He played about 2/3 of the time outside last year for Arizona State, a third of the time in the slot. So he has that versatility. Transferred from Colorado and after the 2022 season. Last 2 seasons, going in 3 seasons, will be in Tempe. 121 targets last year, so he was a big part of that offense. And you talked about the physicality with which he plays and the, I don't want to say lack of separation, but it didn't show up as consistently as some of the other players we talked about. And it took me back to a former first-round pick at Arizona State by the New England Patriots. I want to get your thoughts on the differences because I think these differences are stark, but there's a reason this young man was a first-round pick. N'Keal Harry back in the day, remember him? And never worked out. I think he may have even tried to be tight end by the time his career came to its end. So what are the differences? Because in retrospect, N'Keal Harry probably shouldn't have been a first-round pick, but if you told me Jordyn ended up being one, I could buy it based on what we've seen so far of his college tape.
So I was probably in the minority, and I would say, and again, shout out to Pete Prisco because he's going to choke me when he sees me when I say this, but I had a Arizona State wide receiver bias at that point, right? Just looking in because they've had a ton of talented guys come through there, the Derek Hagens and all of those guys that didn't necessarily quite translate to NFL production. And so with N'Keal, like I saw a guy that didn't separate. He was big, but he couldn't separate. And he could catch the ball and he was physical and all those things. But, to me, the name of the game is being able to separate and win those one-on-one matchups and get open. Now, where I see Jordyn Tyson being better, again, I think they're probably similar in terms of lateral quickness to get in and out of breaks. But I think there's a little more savvy here with Jordyn Tyson. Like I said, he can stack you. He can get you, push you up vertical, get you at the top of the route, and lean, stick, or nod to get you going one way and then put his foot in the ground and make his break and get out and be able to, catch the ball on the move. But again, like N'Keal Harry, I think you saw his true speed once they got the ball in their hands and you saw a different level of speed. But I just think Jordyn Tyson is a little bit more polished route runner than N'Keal Harry coming out that just has a little bit more savvy and knowing how to get open.
Yeah, and in N'Keal's defense, this team is a lot better than the team that N'Keal played on. Some other names, and this guy, Brandon Ayuk, was drafted by the 49ers. As I mentioned, wide receiver 6 in that draft class from 2021, maybe. Ricky Pearsall transferred from Arizona State to Florida. He was in Arizona State. Johnny Wilson transferred to Florida State. He was drafted by the Eagles a few years ago. And, of course, they had Jaden Daniels. That team should have been undefeated with all the dudes they had there. It didn't quite work out. But it is interesting. You talk about the wide receivers that came out of there and the varying levels of success going all the way back to Derek Hagan. That's a nice shout out there as well. So, again, I'll ask a similar question because my comp, as I mentioned, was Alec Ayuminor, who went from potential top 40 pick. And I saw him play live at Syracuse in the fall, and he won that game single-handedly down the stretch. But he struggled like Jordyn to consistently separate, ended up being a 4th-round pick. I think he's going to have a chance to be successful early on in his career in Tennessee. They need playmakers there. What does Jordyn need to do to make sure or give himself the best opportunity to be a top 50 pick? Because the lack of separation, no matter your size, that can be something that sees you get pushed down every single draft cycle. Because if you just said at the top, if you're not getting open in college, there's no reason to believe you're going to start suddenly getting open at the next level.
And see, for me, like I didn't have a problem with his separation, right? Because
Okay.
I think he knew how to get open. Now, again, if you're looking for a physical trait and you're just grading the physical trait in terms of speed and quickness, now that's the question. More so than having the ability to get himself open. There, what I've learned in evaluating and had been around a ton of great evaluators and just asking the question, there are varying ways you can get open. It's not just always speed and quickness. It could be size, it could be length, it could be strength. And I just think he knows how to get open. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's why I projected him more to a Z with big slot flex, because I don't see him being an outside vertical stack you off the line of scrimmage and run by you type of guy. So to answer your question, like he's going to have to run well. And I think if he runs well, then and again, we don't know what run well is anymore because like we talked about 4.47, people turn their nose up, at that. And so I see a guy that's probably going to run in that 4.51 to 4.53 range, which there are plenty of guys, believe it or not, in the NFL right now that are running that know how to get open. I mean, I don't remember exactly what Puka Nacua ran, but we're talking about a guy that was a fifth round pick, and he's probably one of the best separators in the league right now. Same thing with Cooper Kupp, and I'm not comparing, Jordyn to those guys, but Cooper Kupp was a high 4.5, maybe even low 4.6 guy, and I don't think anybody would say that Cooper Kupp has an issue separating whether it was laterally or vertically because you saw him run by guys at the next level as well.
Yeah, Puka's in the 4.5s. I do think Cooper was in the 4.6s. They're both. Puka's plenty big. I think Cooper's bigger, surprisingly big, when people realize how tall he actually is. And the other thing that I was thinking about as you're talking, and these guys played together for a little bit there, Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitzgerald. Neither one of those guys ran 4.3s. Good luck covering either one of those guys for similar reasons, whether short, intermediate, or deep throws. So sometimes we put too much on the 40 time, and it's probably overthinking it, to use my phrase yet again. But I like Jordyn Tyson. He's going to be a big part of that offense in Arizona State this year with Sam Levitt for sure. So that's going to be fun to watch. All right, 4 down, 1 to go. I'm super excited to talk about this next young man. We talked about him a little bit with Tate Klubnik, quarterback conversation last week. So when we come back, wide receiver 1, consensus with the first pick, Antonio Williams out of Clemson. We'll talk about him right after this break. All right, Ran, Antonio Williams, Clemson. Clemson's going to have, they could, no exaggeration, have 5 or 6 guys drafted in the first round. You spent part of last week with Tate Klubnik in Las Vegas. His teammate, Antonio Williams, wide receiver, is going to have a lot to do with how successful this offense is in 2025. 5'10", 190 unofficially. He's the only wide receiver I had with a first-round grade over the course of summer scouting. I would imagine that will change once we get through the draft process. 289 days from now. My comp for him, and I'll be interested to hear what you think about this, Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed was a second-round pick coming out of Michigan State. I think he has first-round traits at times. They're still trying to sort that out in Green Bay. They keep drafting these receivers. Played half the time outside, Antonio did, about half the time in the slot, does have punt return ability. And by the way, a couple things that I look for, 2-time All-ACC academic team selection, that means something to me. But Duke can also play quarterback. He was 2 for 2 with a touchdown last season. Both throws were off-platform, on-target downfield throws. So that's just a little extra something he can do. I would imagine at some point in the pre-draft process, you have these conversations about what else can these players do. But I loved his game, and he stuck out every single time you turned the tape on. You had him in wide receiver 2 behind Jordyn Tyson. What did you like about him?
I liked all those things you mentioned, man. I think he can play X. I think he can play outside as the X. I think he can play in the slot, like you said. And then you look at, I think he tracks the ball very well. That was one of the things that really stood out, his ability to track the ball, his run after the catch skills. I thought he had quickness, twitches, and burst just off the ball. But one of the things that really stood out to me that I thought was cool was his ability to escape at the second level. Right, because and I think that's a forgotten skill at the wide receiver position because of the way college football is played right now. Everyone gets a ton of free releases off the ball, but you see this guy versus squat and mud defenders at the second level. He can win quick, get up to the second level, and still make someone miss. To create separation. And then, like I talked about, his ability with the run after the catch But the key to his run after the catch is his ability to make quick transitions after he secures the ball. He can snatch and then quick put his foot in the ground, get vertical. And then from there, he can be creative and make plays. Now, one thing that really stood out about him, and which why I put him at number 2 for me, is that, I mean, he's productive. We see it there on the screen, 75 catches, 904 yards, but he only has one career 100-yard game, to date. And so that kind of, caught my attention. And so for me, I do see this guy, he's going to be able to contribute quickly at the next level. But, again, look at it, 12.1 yards a catch. And so I want to see this guy, and he makes tons of explosive plays downfield, but I want to see it translate to better production. Again, only one 100-yard game, throughout his career. So that's where I gave Jordyn Tyson the nod over him as wide receiver 1, because you saw the more consistent production on a week-to-week basis.
No, that's an interesting point. And I sometimes struggle to see the forest for the trees. And I say that because our buddy Rick Spielman used to say this all the time. Especially, I love Jalin Hyatt coming out of Tennessee, but Rick kept reiterating to me, and I want to hear what your thoughts are on this. 1 year productivity can be viewed as a good thing, or it could be viewed as, why did it only happen 1 year? That's not necessarily the case with Antonio Williams, but to your larger point, you want to see more explosiveness throughout the course of the season by the time that the season's over. So when you see 1 year productivity, just a general conversation and talking point, does that make you feel good? Like, okay, this guy finally got it? Or do you have some trepidation in that, why has this just now happened? Why hasn't it been a consistent thing over your college career?
I kind of lean to the latter and like, okay, why hasn't this happened more frequently, right? And so, again, it's what I've learned and what I know is particularly about SEC, ACC football. The guys that produce at a high level quickly, they're out of there, right? They're gone, and the real guys leave after 3 years, and that's just what it is. But even guys that have the 1 year production, that after being in college, 3 years, to me, those guys it's just inconsistent. There's no other way to put it. They're inconsistent, and then they just hit it that 1 year, and then they're trying to cash in and want to get the heck out of there. So, and then we get an unrefined project at the next level. And so, to your point, talking about Jalin Hyatt, I wasn't the biggest Jalin Hyatt fan. I saw his blue trait and his vertical speed, but I didn't see a route runner. And then I saw the tightness that would limit him to becoming, one of the elite level route runners. But going back to Antonio Williams, I've watching him and, putting in some calls, and the best comp that I've heard, someone say, and I've been in the building with the guy, was Emmanuel Sanders. And Emmanuel Sanders was a 3rd round pick coming out of SMU, but we know what Emmanuel Sanders was, and became a really good pro.
Yeah, Emmanuel was drafted 2010, I believe, same draft class as Antonio Brown to the Steelers, who was a 6th round pick. And Emmanuel had a better start to his career. Antonio Brown ended up being one of the best route runners on the field. He's working through some off-field stuff as we sit here. But in terms of Antonio Williams, my conversations about Jalin Hyatt weren't about Antonio, just a general point that I was curious to get your thoughts on. But Antonio Williams, as we sit here, consensus with the first pick, number 1 on our wide receiver list. And he did have 8 focus drops, but I thought he was so good on all the millions of targets he got last year that I thought he would overcome that. All right, that's our top 5 wide receivers. Consensus with the first pick, Summer Scouting Series 2025, looking to 2026. As I mentioned, Ran, on Thursday, talking about God's position, the running backs. So I'm extremely excited to hear what you have to say about that. That's right. In the meantime, thanks to all you guys who watch and listen to us. You can check out With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast, scan that QR code, and we will see you guys in the next one.